welcome everybody to what I'm referring to anyway as episode 0 of the as yet unnamed podcast that we've decided to put together. Time for some introductions. So my name is Richard Hogan. I have been working with the Microsoft stack for more years than I care to imagine, all the way through from modern work development through to what I'm currently working with is the security space. I'll pass it across to my colleagues who can then do their introductions. So David.
Good morning. Yes, I'm David Rowley, very similar to yourself, Richard, been in the industry far longer than I care to describe. I'm particularly from the infrastructure world, so I guess you want to call it as a core in the context of our conversations here, but I grew up with Novell and Lantastic and DOS and things, so all the way through to where we are today.
Excellent. And Cyrus?
Hello, everyone. My name is Cyrus Irandoust. I'm probably the youngest here, but I started with mostly the supports and Oracle, and then switched to Microsoft World before the cloud, and now embracing the full power of the cloud of Azure and security especially.
Excellent. So before we sort of kick off on what we wanted to talk about today, I thought we might as well get the disclosures sort of out of the way right at the start. So all three of us currently work for IBM, but this session and the following sessions are not sponsored by IBM in any way, shape or form. All the opinions that are presented will be our own and not reflective of IBM. So I think that covers us from the legal perspective. So the next topic is really why we're trying to do this, because obviously there's lots of podcasts and YouTube channels out there around Microsoft Cloud. However, I was looking at this a little while ago and thinking, well, they all tend to sort of specialize in their own sort of individual pieces. So it might be like a SharePoint one or a sort of Azure Infra one, or even more recently sort of AI components. And the good thing is that we've got three people here that are actually spread probably across the whole piece of the Microsoft stack. So we've got people that concentrate on security, sort of apps and infra pieces, modern work. So that gives us potentially a unique perspective across the whole of the Microsoft stack. And the other reason is that I was doing some research for a piece of work a couple of weeks ago, and I came across a statistic. Now, I always take these statistics with a big pinch of salt. But it came from, I think it was IDC actually, and it said that something like 68% of cloud migrations either fail or prove to be much more difficult than originally planned by the organization. And certainly based on my experience, that stat actually seems to ring true, because certainly with my work with Microsoft, we used to get involved in a lot of sort of troubleshooting projects where something had gone wrong with a migration to, in my instance, to Office 365 at the time, but also into Azure. So one of the sort of key areas was, well, how do we actually be sort of an aid to people or to organizations that are actually on that journey? And so that's sort of one of the core principles, at least from my side, about why we've tried to embark on this, and hopefully that's what may make it more interesting for you, the audience, and hopefully more helpful. So that was my viewpoint. I'm happy to pass across to David and Cyrus to add theirs before we sort of get into the meat of this episode.
Just you found the name. I think the unnamed podcast is very cool. I mean, that's my personal opinion.
I have a horrible feeling that is probably taken up. I'll go and have a look, but I suspect that somebody has already taken that one.
It surely is.
So I suspect that over the next course of, the next few episodes, etc., the structure of this will change. I mean, we'll find what works for us and what works for the audience as well. And by all means, for anybody who is listening to this, please feel free to drop us some comments, suggestions, what you like, what you didn't like, etc. What I wanted to start off with, though, is a couple of things that sort of come to my mind and to David and Cyrus's mind over the course of the last couple of weeks. Now, From my perspective, there's a couple of things. Obviously, Ignite is coming up in a couple of weeks, and I have I'm not sure if it's a pleasure or not, but I will be attending in person. And there's a couple of things that I'm hoping that will sort of show up there. Now, I'm going to sort of flip onto my security piece for a second here. I'm really hoping that there's going to be some announcements around Security Copilot, especially integrating into a more managed service model. Because I know that certainly across the market, there's a lot of organizations that are focusing on a managed service model for Sentinel and Defender, but currently Security Copilot is not really configured or supported in that sort of managed service model. So I'm really hoping that something might be coming up around that. I'm not, to be honest with you, I suspect it won't do, but that would be really nice if it did sort of raise its head within that session. I'm not looking forward to the weather. I suspect it's going to be very cold and windy, being in Chicago as it is, but hopefully we'll be inside the conference center for much of the time. Anyway, that's what I'm sort of looking forward to in terms of Ignite. David, Cyrus, how about you guys?
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to Ignite, but virtually. Richard, I was not lucky enough to be selected to go. And I think for me, there seems to be a lot of movement on the hybrid cloud side of things with Azure Arc, and I was on the Azure Arc community call just a couple of days ago, and there's a bunch of new things. It seems like they're coming. It was an open forum, so they didn't go into any NDA conversations, but certainly alluding to there are going to be some big things coming for sure. And I think they've already announced some really interesting things to public preview, like VMware migration directly to Azure Stack HCI, which is awesome. All on premises, orchestrated in the cloud. So that's a great result in terms of that portability of moving workloads on premises directly and not saturating our links, trying to move everything to the cloud for those that don't want to. So I'm looking forward to seeing more on that for sure.
Excellent. I agree. I think that part of the cloud ecosystem, for want of a better word, it is really interesting the way that they're sort of moving this around. And I think that the sort of hybrid multi-cloud element is going to be really, really key going forwards. And so anything that we can do around to support that, I think it's a really good, interesting area.
Sure.
How about you, Cyrus?
Me, it's a reflection we had like a long time ago with you, Richard. It's how the customers are having a footprint or not in the cloud. Are they mature yet? And when you talk about Arc, for example, most of the clients think it's expensive. They don't know that the core functionality is free. There's this debate now because WSUS is deprecated. So now they look for an alternative to have like offline cached updates. So you have MCC, Microsoft Connected Cache, and the second one is Azure Arc. And yes, there is a price for that. It's £5 a month, $5 a month. I'm sorry. So there is all this discussion about cost, benefits, operational efficiency, security features. So that's very interesting. But yes, it's interesting also to see how the customer respond to that and how to help them see the added value the product can offer. So it's an interesting debate, and of course we see the best for everyone.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I mean, they're bringing adaptive licensing on premises now, pay-as-you-go licensing. So using Arc, so that whole cost conversation suddenly changes when you're talking about running on-demand licensing on premises. There's a whole bunch of interesting conversation there that I think we should get into down the road.
Absolutely. And I think that actually leads us nicely into the sort of main section of today's episode, where I'm going to pass it across to David, who's going to talk a little bit more about Azure Arc. And this way may well lead into a extended session where we'll cover this off in a couple of next episodes to sort of deep dive into what Azure Arc is, what the benefits to organizations may be, and how it helps organizations adopt cloud, especially in a sort of multi-cloud or hybrid cloud scenario. So without further ado, David, the floor is yours.
That's an awful lot to squeeze into one session. So I think
it is.
You're absolutely right. As a product, it's got a huge breadth to it, and perhaps let's focus on the element that I spoke about earlier, just to keep the conversation flowing, and then we can have a deeper dive into the all-up architecture and how it hangs together. And the thing that really caught my eye in terms of this being able to move VMs from VMware to Azure Stack HCI on premises is that it's firstly fully on premises, right? So there is no migration data that goes to the cloud. It is all orchestrated from the cloud and done on premises. You can replicate the data whilst the VMs are running. So you can migrate these workloads without any impact to the apps. The capability also usefully, and you probably strongly disagree with this, Richard, but it supports all the way down to Server 2008 R2. How long ago was that released? I forget now, but it just goes to show the recognition, I think, of the legacy workloads that large organizations are still running on premises, right? There is no other reason why something that old now would be supported as part of that capability. And I think being able to make minimal changes to those things, because we know, right, trying to fiddle with those workloads, they're old, they're flaky, we don't want any impact if possible. So being able to do that on premises directly, huge plus. You can also do things like migrate static IP addresses using this capability, which is really interesting, right? So if you've got a machine that depends on an IP address and a whole bunch of services underneath it, then again, you can take that IP address with it, supports multiple disks, and really, really importantly, it's all agentless. So we have a migration appliance running in the VMware cluster, a mirror appliance running in your Microsoft cluster, and it will just do it all in the background, and then you can choose whenever you want to cut over. So I think as a piece of interesting news, that really caught my eye this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we're talking primarily around the cloud here, and obviously that is the main focus. But another article caught my eye earlier on the week on possibly one of my sort of go-to websites for a little bit of light-hearted news. Anyway, is on the Register, where again I think it was an IDC study saying that people are now repatriating workloads back to on-prem, especially in a sort of a regulated environment. It's sort of primary driver, but I think some of them were saying cost and a few other bits and pieces, which we might come on to in future episodes. But again, Arc in theory, in that sort of state with AVS, would enable you to quite easily repatriate workloads back onto prem if there is a requirement to do so, and then potentially to push it back up again as and when that situation might change.
Yeah, exactly.
So any thoughts from yourself on that?
Honestly, what you just discussed is a topic I wish we could talk about, the remigrating to the on-premise operational efficiency, why Arc is interesting as a central pane of glass. But before I forget, there's also a news that I really appreciated recently is with Windows Server 2025. It's about the hot patch. So now they do a public preview. It's not a private preview anymore. You can actually not reboot the servers and make important updates. I don't think drivers is included, but I have to check. But yeah, most of the updates, you don't need a reboot. It's the hot patch. That's very cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that Azure Arc and as I said earlier on, the sort of the hybrid multi-cloud scenario is something that we're going to dig into a little bit more in future episodes, and probably have a series focusing on that, because it's one area that I think that is, I was going to say not understood, but I think it's not well utilized within a lot of organizations out there at the moment. I don't know, that might just be my perspective, but I haven't come across many sort of organizations that are really leveraging Arc anywhere near to the capability that it actually does provide us. So that was the sort of the middle part of the session, for want of a better description. And now I thought we'd try and wrap up with just some things that have caught our eyes across the whole space it doesn't need to be even IT. It could be anything that's come across our mains. Now, I'm still stuck in Microsoft world, so there's two things that caught my eye today. One only semi related to the Microsoft business, and one that is probably more core to this one. So there's two things that sort of struck me this week, and one of them is actually a couple of weeks old now. In that the HoloLens is dead; it's no more. So that was announced a couple of weeks ago, and I know that it's sort of been on its last legs for quite a while now. And obviously, with the announcements that Microsoft made with Meta a year or so ago, as well, around sort of using that platform for a lot of the sort of augmented and reality pieces. But I still do remember, and again, this is showing my age and how long I've been in the industry, that when the first one came out, and yes, it was a bit clunky, it was heavy, uncomfortable, didn't really, do what I think that we were sort of hoping for, but it did sort of shine a light, I think, on things that we could be doing potentially in the future if the technology ever gets to that level. And I don't even think it's still there. I mean, if you look at the Apple one, for example, there was a lot of sort of mixed sort of feedback around that device and how that would work. But we'll see. Still early stages for that technology, but yeah, no more HoloLens. The other one that caught my eye was going back to the CrowdStrike outage a little while ago. This is the one sort of only tangentially related to Microsoft, because obviously it did impact the Windows desktop environments. Is that Delta are now suing CrowdStrike for, I think, $500 million over that whole piece. So it'll be interesting, I think, to see what actually comes out of that, and whether there's any lasting ramifications that might apply either to Windows, and obviously Windows have had to make some changes, allegedly because of the EU, or at least that's what Microsoft are saying, to how the kernel works and how other third-party processors are allowed access to it. But also in terms of actually how that's going to impact the environments. If there's a server outage, if there's a cloud outage, does that mean that there's more scope for things like that lawsuit to happen? I don't know. We'll see. Conscious I've been going to David first, I'm going to go to Cyrus for this one, for his viewpoint or his interesting thing for this week.
About the last conversation you had about CrowdStrike, it was the MDE. There is a lot of dangerous conversation because we have a Microsoft hat. We don't work for Microsoft, but we have the Microsoft hat. We have to be careful. But yes, MDE would have avoided this kind of issue completely. So that's my small viewpoint on that one. Apart from that, it's more Azure Arc news. But this window, sorry. I suggest anyone who listen to us to follow, and I can't share the link in the chat, probably in whatever platform we use, YouTube, to follow the Azure Arc blog. There's a lot of news every week. There's even one yesterday, a guide to adaptive cloud to Microsoft, and Azure Arc Jumpstart. There's a nice video from John Saville, but you can look at it yourself. It's interesting. You can set up your own Arc environment easily. And that's something that I was thinking for the customers when we have meeting with them. When we talk about Azure Arc, a recommendation could be for them to try on any virtual machine they have, any kind of resource they don't use, and just try to see how it works. And usually when you test yourself, you fall in love with it. That's how it works for me.
Excellent. And yes, and we'll put the link in the show notes or in the YouTube description as well. Excellent. Mr. Rowley.
Awesome. I've got a couple sort of tangentially related, I guess. So the first one is all about Intel, right? And I'm sure you've seen the news, but we've got an organization where you've got microcode causing crashes on machines. You've got new CPUs providing horrible gaming performance. You've got a GPU failure because they obviously went through the process of trying to add RAM to the GPUs and that just didn't work for them. So I'm genuinely wondering if this is kind of a blockbuster moment, with the proliferation of ARM now and the new ARM devices, lower power devices, and there seems to be a pretty heavy shift, from Microsoft to supporting more ARM devices now more broadly, as opposed to the niche sort of developer workstations that you used to have and the other things, right? So I don't know. Is it like a blockbuster moment for Intel at the moment? I really hope, in many ways, that they are too big to fail, because that's such a mainstay growing up. It was always Intel processors for years and years and years and years, and now you see it sort of tailing off, and watching it with real interest, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I certainly, again, I'm old enough to remember my first 286 Intel desktop PC with a little turbo button on the front that would change the clock speed, which I never really understood. But anyway, it was there. It was fun. Could push it when you're playing a game. Just push the button. But I don't know. It's an interesting. I think Intel and AMD potentially, are in trouble. I mean, I've been a sort of Intel or an AMD user for many years. Recently, I think I've spoken to both of you about this. I've moved on to Mac Silicon for the work device. And the difference for doing Adobe workloads in particular, so video encoding, etc., is just absolutely ridiculous. A short 5-minute video was taking 10-15 minutes to encode on the Intel one. Okay, it wasn't the most powerful Intel chip that they gave me, but the M1 MacBook Air, it does it in a couple of minutes. Similar sort of quality and length, etc. So the speed difference is phenomenal. And then if you look at the things like the battery life that you're getting out of the ARM processors as well, it's very difficult for certainly an enterprise usage, I think, to justify going through an Intel-based system at the moment, apart from native applications that might only run on an x86 type architecture or suitable. So anyway, and you said you had two things.
Oh, indeed. Sort of a similar vein, right? I don't know about you, but I've got a bunch of Sonos products in my home, and they have made such a hash of their software recently, to the point where devices essentially you've lost tons of functionality, right? And they're on a rapid clawback, trying to do very, very quick iterative development to get back to where they should be. But again, is that a sign? People are, I guess, cutting workforce, trying to make savings, and they maybe took it a bit too far and lost all that knowledge and skill. And I think for me, that's then a lead into, all right, well, how can we use AI to capture that skill, capture that knowledge, and maybe something for another day, right, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that is interesting because it was related to the new speaker they released, wasn't it, a couple of months ago? I can't remember what that one's called. Is it the Arc or something? I can't remember. But yes, they released the software, and apparently it was complete and utter mess. I haven't stayed abreast that because I don't have any Sonos products in the house. But it sounds like that it hasn't got any better from your perspective.
Slowly getting there. Yeah, the app's definitely slowly getting there. But to revert so far back and kill a bunch of functionality just because you want to support a new thing, I think it's a really important lesson for us all, right?
It is, and I do wonder. Again, this is probably a bit of a tangent, but I'm good at sort of wandering off into tangents. Is that I look at what I've got in sort of the smart home sort of functionality at home. So video doorbells, cameras, spotlights, thermostats, smart light bulbs, etc. And okay, the smart light bulb is probably something that's going to be fairly easy to maintain going forward. But what about the thermostat? How long is Google going to support the Nest thermostat that I've got there? And am I going to have to go and upgrade and change all that around in a couple of years' time because they're not providing updates or support for it? And it's an interesting dilemma. Or they roll an update and in the middle of the winter and it breaks the thing, and I have no central heating for a few days or whatever it might well be. We're so reliant now on that sort of services platform that any sort of change or update into it or licensed in piece or whatever it might well be can really impact the sort of usefulness of those products.
So on that, I agree with the EU. It's a bit controversial, but the EU forced Google to increase the lifecycle management of the device, the Pixel. So they invented like a 7 years warranty, 9 years warranty that they will deliver a software update, security update, etc. So for the Nest, I expect some sort of decision in the EU or elsewhere to force the vendors to maintain the product. But just before you talk about the turbo button, and I just want to go back in that era. And that's very important topic, David Brink, about the ARM processors. I was watching Intel and AMD unite against ARM because exactly probably the existence is threatened. That was interesting. And I remember the two different paradigms you talked about, the M1 you're using, Richard, and that's exactly when the ARM started to really sell. Because Windows, we had Windows R. Do you remember Windows R? I unfortunately used it like a long time ago. It was for a client. I said, you can use Windows. It's a cheap device. It's fast. And it was fast, but there was no application. You could not use anything. And the emulated one didn't work. The way Mac developed the emulation part, some of the products are not designed for using ARM, yet they're still efficient and they're still fast. That's the key. And if we see that in the cloud applications, maybe users will demand that on the cloud I want ARM because I can increase 150% my efficiency, and I can reduce the cost by doing so. So that will be interesting. If the cloud is using more and more ARM, that can be really, really, really interesting to watch.
I think this was just before I joined Microsoft, and I think possibly the same for you, David, is that they did the Surface RT, if I remember correctly.
I've still got one. I was there.
I had to give mine back because I went to I was in Build that year in Anaheim, where they actually gave the RT device out to all the attendees, but I had to give it back to the company I was with at the time. And I don't know if you remember, and it was part of that sort of whole piece and the Windows Phone bit, but we were both at Microsoft at the time, and we actually had a whole department sat on the same floor in Thames Valley Park that we did, writing code for applications for that on behalf of the companies themselves. So in effect, Microsoft was saying, look, we will write, I'm going to make something up now, like a Facebook app, so Facebook doesn't have to. So we'll write the Facebook app, we'll deploy it into the marketplace so people can use it. And you, Mr. Facebook, or whatever company it was, doesn't have to, develop that resource yourself just to get that adoption going. Obviously, it didn't work because it was killed basically as soon as Satya took over, in effect, from the Balmer era. But that's taken me back sometimes. And I actually did like that app, and I did like the interface as well. And if you think about live tiles and the whole Metro or whatever they ended up calling it, because they couldn't call it Metro because somebody else had called something Metro, and there's a big faff about that. Apple are rolling out something very similar to live tiles now. I can't remember what they're calling them, but it almost is the whole live tile experience from that sort of Windows 8 user experience.
Yeah.
So there you go. Everything's cyclical in IT. Always comes back around. So with that sort of dive into nostalgia, I think we are about ready to wrap up for today's episode, and that's coming in at just over 38 minutes, which is for something that we didn't really plan is not bad going. Anyway, if you like this episode or like the format, please like, subscribe, rate, etc. on whatever platform that you might be listening to or watching this on. As I say, any comments, please let us know, because we want to try and make this as useful for you, the listeners and watchers, as we possibly can do. But any final comments from anybody before we wrap up for today's session?
We're really keen to hear your feedback. So please, positive or negative, please do so. So as Richard said, it's episode 0. We're not even sure if it will be published, but just in case you see our face on YouTube, please be free to share any feedback. It will help us, and we listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as the first one, I really enjoyed it, guys. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who's going to listen. But yeah, importantly, thank you to you guys.
Yes. And before we do go, Cyrus has just reminded me of something that I was asked when I was talking to some people about this the other day. Why you call it this episode 0? And there was 2 things that came into my head about why I called it episode 0. I'll be interested to see whether anybody guesses the first one, because I don't actually think I told anybody. But arrays start at 0, so that's where the 0 came from the initial. But obviously, from an agile perspective, obviously sprint 0 is the sort of the getting prepped and getting arranged piece. So hence that's why episode 0 as opposed to episode 1 or pilot or whatever it might well be. But anyway, I thought I'll just throw that in at the end, just as a bit of trivia and to give people a mind, a view into the way that my weird mind works. And on that note, we'll say thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.
Lovely. Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.